that what are some things that we can do to ensure success? A little bit about me. I grew up an hour and a half north of here in northeast Nebraska. My brother and I still run cows on our home place. I moved to Minnesota, southwest Minnesota, 20 years ago. And at that time, our practice was a large swine and dairy influence practice. My plan was to move there, learn a little bit about pigs and dairy cows, leave all my screw-ups in somebody else's backyard, and go back to Nebraska and open a beef practice. However, the ethanol industry in northwest Iowa, southwest Minnesota bloomed. The influx of byproduct came cattle. And through that, been able to do high-level feedlot consulting and some ranch consulting in Montana and western South Dakota and North Dakota. So right now I travel the road from Montana to Michigan, kind of North Dakota to Arkansas. I'm licensed in 12 states and do a fair amount of feedlot consulting, ranch consulting, and dairy calf stuff. So all things beef, as well as manage our vet team of highly talented veterinarians at Southwest Vet Service. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to talk a little bit about things that I guess I find on different operations, no matter how big, how small, that everybody does differently, but they contribute to success in different ways on those operations. So this is the disclosure that they forced me to put up there so that anything I say can't be held or against me in a court of law. Just kidding. So part of the agenda, I think some of the things that as I go from farm to farm or operation to operation, everybody's normal is different. And being able to be a good ally to these farms is helping people meet them where they're at, assess some goals, and give them a set of tools or develop some skills that will help them achieve those goals. So what's normal? What can we control? So control the controllables. Some things we can control and some things we can't. And how do we develop some consistency with our cattle, with our day-to-day operations, with the hand we've been dealt. And so how we manage through that is going to be different for different farms, and it's hard to make one broadcast recommendation based on that. So what you'll find today is I'll give you some things to think about in your own operation, and what I hope to do is stimulate some thought processes or have you jot down some notes about some things that what's normal and does that line up with your goals for succession of the next generation, for adding on to your yard, for doing some other things. So I got this picture here because this was what I found when I went to a large yard. And you don't have to go to vet school to see that this isn't normal. This is a granuloma on the face of a steer that was hit by a feed truck. And oh yeah, they just found that yesterday. How long's that been there? Oh God, 2-3 days max, doc. And so this obviously wasn't normal. We had to develop a set of plans to address it. And so we took and surgically amputated that off that calf. And you can see that from the cover on him that's probably an 8-week-old lesion, but he hasn't lost much cover yet. And so we surgically amputated it, and he went on and made it to the truck just fine. But finding out what's normal is a big deal. So what's normal look like? It's interesting because as I go and develop health protocols and set parameters for success on feed yards, pull temperature becomes a point of contention between the crew, the manager, and the veterinarian sometime. And so this is a list of what they teach you in vet school of what normal looks like. Temperature of a cow is 100.5 to 102.5. Well, we get arguing about pull success, and we start to layer over case fatality rates, we start to layer over antibiotic success rates, and we find that there is a sweet spot of the bat or a prime temperature for our pulls and success on each farm, and it's different. And if we used only one metric to define success, we really wouldn't do it, because I've got some yards that a 103.8 is their pull temperature, and anything above that gets treated and anything below it doesn't. that do a far better job than some of the yards that use a 104.1, or it's different based on the ability of the crew that's wielding the thermometer. So everything's in relative fashion. So I tell the cowboys, don't let the thermometer do the thinking for you. If we've got an animal out of the pen, why do we have him out of the pen? Does he need something else? Is he backed away from the bunk? Is it a true respiratory disease? Because that's our primary thought process, right? Comes out, he must be a respi. And that's not necessarily the case. What's the normal respiration rate? Well, it's 25 to 50. We really don't, it's either fast or slow to a feedlot cowboy, right? Docky's breathing fast. Okay, then it's probably above 50. Well, what could cause him to breathe fast? Well, do we have an acidosis situation, right? So when cattle get acidotic, they use their respiratory system to equilibrate that pH in their system, so they blow that acid off. And so you'll find an elevated respiratory rate in an acidotic calf that has perfectly normal lungs. And so as we layer all these things into normal, it helps put our outcomes in a box and our goals. Heart rate, some people measure, some people don't. Rumination rate, generally we don't. They make you measure it in vet school, but empty or full is kind of the common denominator on a feed yard that we get to. So that all goes along, that's a long way of saying that everything is relative. And knowing the ability of your people, knowing the type of cattle that you feed, knowing what you've got to work with feedstuffs and cropping operation helps to define your normal. You know, are you a once-a-day feeder or twice-a-day feeder? What is your normal? What is your mixer and delivery efficiency? Everybody's metric in this room is going to be different for that. How about your feeding times? Are they plus or minus 15 minutes? Are they 30 minutes? Are they an hour? As backgrounding has migrated north, let's just say into the Dakotas, substantially more, and kind of west, even into eastern Montana, feeding time is very relative because some of those backgrounding low kind of potency diets do have a wider margin of error for delivery time. And as you get to different parts of the world, they deal with multiple different things. A commercial feeder in Kansas has substantially different requests or pulls on their time than a farmer feeder in northwest Iowa during corn planting season, and it's going to rain all weekend. So what is our feeding time? What's our feeding order? Do we communicate that to our crew? What is our philosophy? So all these things, as you think about it, what is our normal, and are there different things? And that's one of the fun things that, as my brother and I are starting to bring my sons and my nephews into our operation as part of our cow business, my normal and his normal are substantially different. And it's even more different as you bring another generation into it. And so, like I said before, we do a great job in ag of telling people how, but we don't do a great job of telling people why we do things. And so as I find that as a shortcoming in myself as a manager, that sometimes we get too busy to tell people why, we just tell them what to do. And so then we lose the ability of our folks to think for us. Feed stuff. What's our inventory management look like? Are you a feeder that feeds good buys? And what do you have for storage? How do we control our dry matter and our shrink? It's amazing how many conversations I have about the efficacy of a specific antibiotic. So-and-so's not working, or such and such is not working, and we've got a silage pile worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that doesn't have a tarp on it, that shrinks 20% every year. And so there's always a give and a take, but let's pick up the big dollars along the way and worry about the dimes later. So feedstuffs is a big deal that I try to help folks understand and manage. And the other thing is, we need to understand from you guys, what's your business model? If you're a custom cattle feeder, what is your primary profit center in your yard? It's interesting when you talk morbidity and mortality statistics. I've got some yards that I work with that pulling 30% of a pen of cattle is no big deal. And losing 7-8% of those is built into the budget. Now, I've got yards that could never fathom that. And so everybody's normal is different based on morbidity and mortality. So when I go to sit down and consult with an operation, I generally start with who are you and what are you good at, and what do you want to get better at, and what can we do to do that. Riding walking cattle 1, 2, 3 times. I've got a number of yards that feed high-risk calves, and as we've added another trip through, which I don't know if anybody in the room's got a labor excess. I generally find that not to be the case. But adding in a third time walking those cattle has upped our treatment success by somewhere between 7 and 12% on some of these yards that feed these high-risk calves. But it comes at a cost, right? Not everybody's got that labor around. What's your full-time equivalent per 1,000 head on feed? That's a metric that I often use to assess labor, because if I've got a crew that is push for time, that is the one thing that will allow a really good crew to not do as good a job, is to not have enough hours in the day to get things done. So how much help do you have, and what else do you have going on? You know, a commercial feeder in Oklahoma, that's all we're doing is feeding cattle. We don't really do much crop work. So it just depends on your operation. So the joke around the clinic is, I went to school for 8 years to look at poop, because as we go through and tell a whole lot, you can tell a whole lot about a yard of what's going on by looking at the fecal material. And so we've got some new veterinarians that have started with our practice, and so as we walk, they'll find we're out there to look at sick cattle, and they'll find me looking at my boots and looking through the pen like this versus out here like this most times, because the manure really tells a story of what a pen looks like. And it's interesting as you get to a crew where the workload is fairly siloed between a feeding crew and a health crew. As we bring those two set of eyes that all look at the cattle every day together, teaching them what normal looks like, so that when the cowboys say, hey, we got a bunch of looseness here, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, it shows up as a bunch more pulls and deads in 2 to 3 weeks that from our historic acidosis challenge, they know what to look like, as well as training the feedlot or the feed truck drivers to write down some numbers and help their cowboy counterparts out. So generally, too loose, yeah, we get that. You'll note the bubbles in those, and that's one of the things I work a lot with cowboys and teach them to read manure. If we find bubbles in loose feedlot stools, or you get the gray kind of ghost tint on the top, it indicates a high passage rate of acid to the hind gut, and there's a bunch of hind gut fermentation. So 2 to 3 weeks from this episode, that calf has got about a 70 to 80% higher chance of coming down with respiratory disease. And so that's why loose poop needs to matter to the cowboy crew, because after acidosis will come respiratory disease. And so that's why, as I train new veterinarians, it does matter how loose those cattle are and how long they've been loose. Almost as bad, and maybe even worse, is too dry of manure, because this calf hasn't eaten anything, right? If this calf's been at the yard, let's say less than 10 days on feed, and we're still producing this kind of manure, that's a calf that's standing in the back picking at bedding or not eating at all, and may or may not have been treated. And so too dry is as bad as too loose, in my opinion. And so those are the things that when we start to pick up on those, we start to communicate back to the folks that can affect change in those cases. And then we've got a mixture. And in a pen, we're always gonna have a mixture. And so I'm gonna refer back to the old bell-shaped curve that got me through vet school right now, because we're kind of managing for the bell-shaped curve, right? We're gonna have some really smart ones, and we're gonna have some really dumb ones in our class. And we're going to have some really dry stools, and we're going to have some really loose stools. And when we kind of get outside of those normalities that we fully expect when we manage a population, I want no more than 5% too loose, no more than 5% too dry. And so as I'm training cowboy crews to walk through, paying attention to once we're outside of those normal parameters is super important, because I was training this one guy and he's like, Doc, look at these. And I said, okay, well, you got 3. How many are in here? Well, there's 230 head in this pen. Okay, so we got 3. Let's do a little math. And anytime I can keep a cowboy from doing math, it's super good. But I said, let's just kind of, we want to stay less than 5%, 5% of 230. I said, let's just call it 10. Oh, okay. Well, we'll keep walking and then we're done. And he keeps counting, and we got to 6. And so I'm like, so should we talk to Bill, the feed guy? No, I think we'll just watch this pen. I'm like, perfect. That's when we, get away from the sky is falling mentality, is once we define what normal looks like. And I have the same conversation as generally grown children are coming back from college and joining an operation. That's one of the most fun things that I get to do as a veterinarian, is work with those people that are coming back to the farm and help them kind of get outside the box of maybe what mom and dad told them is normal, and see where their goals are in the operation. So as we look at these 3 different environments are substantially different. We've got a bed pack, or we've got a slat barn. We've got a bed pack, kind of open air yard, and then we've got kind of a high plains yard in southern Nebraska there. And so each one of these normals is different. And so one of the things while you're here at this meeting, I'd look around the room and see who's in this meeting, because they're going to be the people later on that have some commonalities. And it's interesting how a slat barn guy and a guy from Oklahoma in big yard country, they can change a lot of ideas. They have substantially different challenges, but their normals are going to be totally different. When I say bunk space, we're kind of running 4 to 24 inches of bunk space, right? It can be different. And I don't want to sit up here and go, yeah, this guy just told us a bunch of stuff that's different. And so, generally we kind of will start calves at a foot of bunk space. I've got some guys that finish and flip the fat on cull cows, and they're running closer to that 20 to 24 inches of bunk space. Just, you need that kind of horsepower to get those or that kind of space when you get those cows stacked side by side. And then we've got some of those slat barns that I just showed you that are running in that 4 inches of bunk space when you start to calculate it out. Pen space is the other thing that's substantially different. 300 square feet in that yard that's in that picture right there, down to 25 square feet in that slat barn that's in northwest Iowa or southwest Minnesota. Water space, that 1/2 inch to 2 inches is generally what we'll work on, and water reflow rates are a big deal. And shelter shades are totally different from farm to farm. And so each time I go to a different farm, the normals are different. So having our reset, I've got a number of folks that have always fed in outside concrete pens in southwest Minnesota, and they've got a kid coming home from college. And we now want to build a slat barn at the end to add on to the feed yard to make room for the son that's coming back. Those 2 systems are the same, but they're different. And so being able to, as we look to grow or look to change our business model, what's our new normal? And it was interesting today, even this morning, we had a conversation with some folks downstairs that have some excess finishing barn space that the tenant may end up vacating. And we've got a number of those that are being converted into light calf crossbred barns. And so it's a great use of that facility that's probably still got some life with minimal cost, and it would allow an opportunity for another son to come back to the operation. So all those things are very important as we look at that, but the normal inside that barn is going to be different than it was when we were running it for finishing hogs. I always throw this up there. This is a tale of 2 bunks. You can see the upper graph there. You can see that's dry matter dry matter intake, and you can see how variable that is. That's in a yard in northwest Iowa that was outside and didn't have any concrete. You can see how every time one of those, as you overlaid the dates on the bottom, was a rain event. And so that's when the pen would get real muddy, and that's when we were feeding a lightweight calf that maybe didn't match his bunk very good. Because you can see that calf on the right, as there's no mud, there's plenty of room between his neck and that bunk. But as you add 5 inches of mud and sometimes even 10 inches of mud, that eating behavior goes up and down. The graph on the bottom is a different yard a few miles away, same set of cattle at a different stage, but you can see how much more consistent. Those are the same dates on that graph, just a different environment. And so you can see, and you could argue that we're not challenging those calves enough on the bottom, but at the same time you can say that we're really not we're not sitting on pins and needles calling bunks on that one either. Because every time it rains or every time we have an environmental event, we have a challenge. So it's kind of the normal, whether it be normal about the cattle, normal about the environment, normal about your feedstuffs, and then controlling the controllables. And I don't know to what degree any of these are totally controllable. Labor, feedstuffs, cattle source, preventive maintenance, and then tracking. I say tracking is kind of the looking in the rearview mirror of the strategies that we make and kind of how we get into a habit of assessing what we're doing. So what is your labor situation? What is your full-time equivalent per 1,000 head? It's different on the yards that start a 250-pound crossbred calf or that have some 350 to 400-pound stalker calves that they turn out. That's Dr. Spencer Walter on that horse right there, and I had to put that up there just so he was here. That's the horse's name is Two Dogs. That's him doing some employee training where he rides with the cowboys to help improve their treatment outcomes on a monthly basis, because labor is an issue and they're short and we need to get the most out of our full-time equivalents that we have. Investing in training for the good ones that we have is a really good return on investment, and Spencer's been a great addition to our practice. What are the levels of their skill? Are they a gate holder? Are they ability to be a doc? Or are they a cowboy? One of the biggest mistakes we made in a yard that I consult was we had a guy that showed up on time, super good, diligent at what he did. He was the water washer on this yard. That's all he did was wash waters and do pen maintenance. We made the mistake of promoting him to a doc. And that was the worst thing we ever did. Waters were never as clean as they were. And he didn't want to be standing at the chute making treatment decisions. He was happiest he ever was out there washing waters. And so as the manager came to me and said, hey, we need to reevaluate what we've got him doing, it was very clear that he was happiest once we let him go back to washing waters, and that's all he ever wanted to do. So being able as managers to assess the level of skill and match that to our jobs is getting harder and harder in our position. So, and sometimes just if I've got somebody that's really trainable, can I get him a gate holder and really accomplish the same goal of two people? And there are people that just are never going to be much more than a gate holder on some of the farms, and they don't want to be. And what is their level to communicate effectively? It's been interesting as we've had some language barriers come in, as we've had a Hispanic crew start on with an Anglo crew. How do we manage the communication gap that we know is very present in our industry? And there's so much of that is a whole social dynamic of communication and how we work that into our system. So control the controllables, find out how we can get the different sectors of our labor force to communicate effectively has been sometimes sometimes the best strategies, but it takes a lot of work. It takes month after month kind of conversation to uncover some of those. And what's their capacity to do the right thing? There was a study one time, it was done out at Harvard, and there's a gal broke down with her bicycle, and they had the study subjects start in this building, and they had to get to this building by as fast. One group had to go as fast as they could, and the other group had as much time to get there in the whole day. And this gal was broke down, and she was part of the study. She was broke down on the bicycle, and the point of the study is to assess how busy impacts your ability to do good to others. And so the people that could get to the other building and with any given time were 3 times more likely to help this gal with the broke down bicycle than the people that were too busy that said, get there as fast as you can. And I think that factors into all of our farms and all of the things that we do and all of our vet clinics that we have to manage, of that balance between productivity of our labor and doing the capacity to do the right thing. The ability to see that one cow. Hey doc, while you're here, will you see one more cow? Yeah, I got time. And she's early in the disease process, so we have better outcomes. Versus now I got to get to the next farm. And so I don't have time to do that. And so the capacity to do the right thing is often a function of busy. So as we go home, your ability to think about the controllables on your farm, this is, like I said, this is more of a thought-stimulating conversation or presentation than it was a hard and fast rules to take home. How open are they to learning? And what are you doing to support their growth? Like I've said over and over again, we do a good job telling how, but we don't tell why. And then how have we identified some of their strengths? So what I find myself doing on a number of farms is out there coaching and identifying people's strengths and matching people to helping management match people to the right roles on the farm. And so sometimes the controllables are taking a step back. And one of the hardest conversations I ever had was to tell a feed yard manager that his son needed to be nowhere near driving a feed truck. And that was uncomfortable, but it was true. And we had the data to put that, to back that up. And so it wasn't his strength. Now, from a crop standpoint, there's nobody better than that young man. But in a feed truck, his mind was elsewhere, similar to the water washer that I referred to earlier. So identify our crews, their strengths, and I even see it in my sons and in my nephews as they join our operation, that what we think strengths are and what their strengths actually are sometimes harder to identify. Feedstuffs. What is your business about? You know, it's interesting as we've added a layer of nutrition into FBN here. Understanding what commodities are important to a feed yard is something that we as veterinarians didn't have that conversation very often. Or how are you selling your silage? What is your most profitable feedstuff? So understanding our business and making sure that the professionals that consult your farm understand that what your business is about. Is it about flipping high-risk calves? Is it about taking the ball out of calves and backgrounding for folks? What is your business about? And where do you want it to go? And are you happy where it is today? What works best with your equipment? Payloader, skid loader, what kind of mixer do you have? Hopefully these are all conversations that we get to have tonight downstairs around a beer that you can pick somebody else's brain, because I know some of the most interesting conversations come with our neighbors at home. How do you manage shrink? Do you have a commodity shed? Do you have a silage tarp? I cringe every time I go past a silage pile that doesn't have a tarp, just for the amount of shrink that goes on. And does your agronomy plan work with your feed plan? That's one thing that we've been working on personally is our agronomy plan for feedstuffs, as well as being able to run a profitable farm. Can you partner with your neighbor to pull corn or pull stalks off of his ground? And does it make sense for everybody? Here's a couple nice examples of different commodity storages that are out there. Substantially different costs, substantially different business models to support the use of either one of these. Cattle source. You think that black calf from South Dakota ever expected he was going to be in a pen with something like that? It was super crazy when we were driving the bunk line at this farm and that thing peeked its head over the top. I thought, biosecurity, what? So what is your cattle source? How do they flow into your farm? Are you a fall run feeding calf feds? Are you a yearling feeder that is in and out? And are you feeding calf ranch calves? In our part of the world, some of those slat barns and some of those monoslope bed pack barns, the calf ranch calf works really well in that business model because they are so predictable. They are very even coming in, very even going out. Are we in the business for sale barn calves or ranch calves? I was given a talk in northern Minnesota, which is our highest risk type of calf that comes to us in Minnesota. And I said, why are we feeding these things? We were talking, they were lamenting how our health protocols weren't working as well. And he says, hell, Doc, I need to feed 5 times your good South Dakota or Nebraska calves for what I can make on one of these high-risk calves. And he's not wrong, but knowing who you are is different. And I saw that was probably 2 years ago, where all the straightened out calves were too expensive for a number of yards that I work with. And so all of a sudden we lay in a bunch of high risk calves and they're dying like flies because our crew is full of gate holders and not enough docks. So we've overwhelmed the system. So being able to look in the mirror, I said, we are not a yard that can feed these calves. And it doesn't matter what you paid for them. But our crew doesn't have the capacity to do that at this point. And so plan the work and work the plan. Backgrounders versus finishers, we've got different roles. Are you custom feeder, owner, partner cattle? And do our plans match the cattle that we're feeding? Preventative measures. You know, what's interesting is, as I've been exposed to a number of FBN members in different parts of the country, when I ask, what's your incoming health protocol? And we don't have it written down, and it doesn't change from cattle type. And so that's one of the things is get an incoming health protocol written down for your operation. Is it for high risk and is it low risk? Has that changed? Are those low risk cattle that we bought suddenly high risk calves because of a trailer breakdown or a truck breakdown? Do you have a chute charge? This has been an interesting conversation as I've had some yards go from owning all the cattle and to a custom situation where we don't charge a chute charge, a trip charge to go to the chute for a sick pull. And it was amazing as we start to work down the economic impact of that, how much money the yard was losing in labor by not being compensated for that as some folks send them some cattle that were really a lot more, needed to be intensively managed more than what the crew was used to. Antibiotic treatment protocol. That is one of the things that I assess on a lot of yards is what is the sequence of antibiotics. And if I asked everybody in this room, their primary antibiotic for first pull would be different. And they sit at different levels in the sequence, first pull, second pull, third pull, based on kind of the types of cattle we see, based on your clinical response. But as some of these computer systems like PLA and Cattler have entered into the space where we don't need to be a 30,000 head yard to have a computer system, some of the health outcomes, we've got some benchmarks that we really think that some of our best cowboys are really pulling good and hard, but as you start to benchmark them and track some of those metrics, they don't stack up to some of the industry standards. And so lots of times I'll get called out because antibiotic X isn't working. And we get looking at that and you layer in temperature, you layer in experience of the crew, and we've got other places to work other than antibiotic X. And so are we tracking efficiency of our antibiotics and efficacy? And do we have the metaphylaxis rules of thumb out there for our operation? When do we pull the trigger on a mass med? Lots of times, and we will get called in as veterinarians after we've had, and this happened to me in South Dakota, is get called in and, hey, can you come post a calf? Need you here right away. Yep. So I cut him open, yep, chronic mannheimia, or acute mannheimia with chronic mycoplasma bovis lesions in it. And I said, here's what we got going on. I said, how many have you lost? Well, this is number 22. I said, holy crap, really? You've lost 10% of that pen. And now I'm in here. And we're in chronic management at this point. We are not moving the needle on antibiotic. What do we pull up next? I'm like, well, it's not an antibiotic issue at this point. It's about managing. It's like triage at this point. So the sooner we intervene in a lot of these disease processes, the better outcome we can be. And that's where, had we had a metaphylaxis rule of thumb or a trigger point, these operations, you know, lots of times we can make those decisions on our own earlier in the process and affect our outcome, especially in today's feed environment. We've got to be able to do that. When I'm controlling the controllables, I was at a yard. We have we've got 5 feed trucks. We had 1 running 2 days in a row. How often, so the veterinary call that day was, what is our truck preventive maintenance schedule, fellas? Because if we're not going to get around to get anything fed, and then all of a sudden, and I said, are you guys seeing bloats? Yeah, we are starting to see bloats. I'm like, I bet you are. And so some days it's not veterinary medicine that we end up doing. It's more like detective work. So what is the scheduled maintenance around the rest of the farm? And then tracking. I really, like I said before, the AHI and the micro beef systems were typically in the past relegated to bigger yards. And as performance beef and cattler have entered the space, they really have brought some of those metrics and benchmarks that traditionally were only reserved for the biggest yards down to the level of, my brother and I run it for our mama cow operation, just from an inventory management and just a health outcome deal. So, you know, for 200 cows to 20,000, 20,000 head feed yard, that technology is accessible to all levels. And what that does, it allows us to look at our normal and are we calling our normal what it is? Are we real about who we are and what we do? And do we have the right people on the bus to make the change? And are we getting the outcomes that we expect? And is it a people? Is it a process? Is it a inventory or product issue? And so, and you can't manage what and at this point I put won't measure. So it used to be you can't manage what you don't measure. And today, in today's day and age, as this technology is becoming more and more affordable, we're choosing not to measure it if we don't have some of these systems in place on our farm. And then consistency. Consistency in feeding time, feeding amount, feeding quality. That bullet point on the bottom says plain vanilla ice cream. I got this from a feed yard owner that I work for. I says, hey, we could do this and this and this. And he says, Doc, we just want to make plain vanilla ice cream around here. We got to keep our soldiers marching down the road, just plain vanilla ice cream. I said, okay, well, we could change this, could change this. Nope, plain vanilla ice cream. He's like, that's Rocky Road you're talking about right there. So the consistency of what we do every day, it says we are what we repeatedly do. That excellence is not an act, but a habit. And boy, is that not more true on a fed cattle operation. And so the more that we can define who we are and what we do, the more we can understand what we have the ability to control and absolutely control that. And the more consistently we can do that, the more success we have. And that's what's super good about what we do is if we can keep these things consistently or make the changes when we need to or identify when those aren't tracking with what we want to do, the more successful we can be. So with that, I'll take any questions we've got. I know, hopefully I've got you guys thinking versus spewing out what I think is a 1X better than a 2X. Is it, and you can answer any question with it depends, right? Well, do you like Nebraska or Oklahoma? Well, it depends who they playing, and so I don't want to do that, but anything that has sparked in your mind here that you want to share with the group or have a question for, shout it out. Otherwise, we're going to be around for the rest of the show. We're happy to talk about your individual operations, and that's what our vet team is here for right now, to help answer some of these questions that you may or may not have. Questions?
Yeah, when you said you were losing, well, you knew of someone losing 30% of, the cattle that were in a pen, what were they kind of dying from?
Everything under the sun is what they were dying from. And so I found mycoplasma, I found Haemophilus with a really hot BVD on top of it. So we had not only underlying those infectious disease things that I'll put here in a box, and this was a super hot type 2 BVD, but we also had a high parasitism load that we didn't address correctly, and we had a copper deficiency in their liver. So it was a take your pick,
Kind of sounds about like it could be anything.
Yeah, exactly. So, we came in and we didn't address the parasites right, and we didn't address the copper. So you throw in a really hot bug and name your bug, it'll turn into a wreck. And anymore, the things that I deal with are multifactorial, because the big smoking gun things that you all can fix with one bullet, most of you had shot at least 2 bullets at it by the time I get called. And so the stuff, it's 10% of 10 things. It's not one big smoking gun anymore. So. What else?
In your feedlot travels, you see a lot of different places. What would be the low-hanging fruit or the easiest area of opportunity to make some changes when you come on a yard?
When I come on a yard, depending on the yard, the things that I see are a lot of times the most money is to be made in managing shrink and managing the feed delivery part of the yard. Generally, when we look at the spend of antibiotic and health impact on that, it's pennies compared to quarters when we talk about the feed side of things. And it's really easy for the vet to look at the nutrition side and the nutrition to say you need to be pulling deeper on the vet crew. But I come across so many piles that aren't tarped. I come across so much distillers that's on dirt, and our distiller's pile at home is on dirt, and it drives me nuts. But we're going to do some concrete next year. But those things to protect the biggest value or the biggest input cost of our farm are probably the lowest return. I think the other thing when it comes to the crew standpoint, I think getting the right people in the right spots on the crew, and some of there's some politics that got to be addressed a lot of times on a farm, that people maybe aren't in the right seat for a reason. Thank you.